Thanks a lot for joining. We are at lesson 5. Today we discuss about difference between on-prem and cloud. So one of the main mistake that is happening nowadays is to think that by design on-prem is a lot of legacy and so by default is less secure than cloud. Actually, I want to walk you through main difference area in the design. Some will be quite normal for you to think of, other will be more offensive focus, and so more on the pen testing side. I decided to kick off this topic to start from the attacking perspective. So the attacking perspective is generally focus on techniques and everything. I want to show you something in advance about the MItre. What I will describe here is not in the technique of MItre. And if you take each MItre cloud for each cloud service provider, you'll find that they are quite similar one to each other. So my first suggestion, don't rely on that. Think more on which cloud service provider you use and how that specific gets attacked. I'm going to give you an example of VPC AWS abuse. And later on, I will come back to the conversation and compare between on-prem and cloud. So it's really important to think that the VPC is the key component into the network infrastructure of an IaaS. And it's actually quite common to steal a credential, connect to the VPC, and you do use pivoting to create a VPN between your endpoint, the VPC, and pivoting inside and having access to resources that you shouldn't have access. So one of the project, for example, is VPC VPN pivot. And you'll find it that it's really common practice to just exploit it in this manner. So it's not the only problem of the VPC. VPC allow also to enable traffic mirroring. So here you have an article really nice from Rhino Security, abusing VPC traffic mirroring in AWS. He is discussing how easy it is to have a VPC exploited, get traffic mirroring on, and be at risk, especially about traffic that could be offloaded, SSL offloaded, I mean. It's true, in cloud, you tend to create more end-to-end, but is one of the issues that you can experience is also the fact that you could sniff traffic. And don't forget that it's all about keys, the problem. We should also keep in mind that when, for example, an attacker is using AWS, potentially can do a VPC to VPC VPN if he's having the credential. And that will automate and scale the compromise in a manner that will stay in your history. So the fact that a VPC to VPC is also within network, different subscription should trigger some alarms is not for sure the first things that you should think of as attack because it's a bit noisy, but should be considered. So now let's come back to the topic comparing the on-prem to the cloud. The on-prem structurally is having a design that is double hop, so DMZ, LAN, and within the LAN you do have the east-west traffic. The cloud tend to be flexible in terms of design and is up to your style of designing. You can have multiple VPC in cascade. You could do whatever. So I'm not claiming that cloud design is the problem. The design is who design, who think of it. So you could find VPC that are having all network all around and not much of a double op. So you compromise one, you laterally move based on the policy that you are having across the VPC, and it's a bad kind of a situation where you actually made your network way flatter. On the other side, we need to consider that on-prem it does have some critical components that I stress about. For example, the vulnerability, the management VLAN, compromise at OS level a device that is attached to a management VLAN, let to go through our table a layer 2 going across and bypassing firewall visibility. Sometimes depends how you design the management VLAN, obviously. Another kind of problem could be connectivity to HSM on-prem. If historically there was an HSM that got scaled and is using connectivity to outside, that is another key point. On-prem can have a focus also on MQ kind of queuing, and so obviously that can add some sort of vulnerabilities that you don't have. The key core component of on-prem that is quite critical is the hypervisor. And one of the issues is the networking of the hypervisor, the security of the hypervisor, and I add on top of that the fact that the hypervisors, if we take, for example, this pair, is scaling in a direction where actually now you can run container into that. So obviously this one make it ready for an hybrid deployment, but it does open the routing to that. It could introduce other problems. So I'm not a big fan of whatever is on-prem is bad, whatever in cloud is good by design because it's just new. Because actually, cloud it does have some problems that are built in on the cloud history. Cloud does have two key points. One, historically, each service was so agile developed that each design was made to be public facing. So it's not uncommon that all design went from private to public to come back private. Some of these implementation infrastructure as a service are still sometimes common because finally cloud service provider realized that it wasn't a good way and started to work on segregating the internal traffic, so to keep, for example, API call between two private network identity to be within a private VPC and never cross outside. But you'll still find somebody that actually had the first historical move to cloud into infrastructure, got it configured in that way, and later started to focus on Kubernetes PaaS kind of stack or Lambda. So even if it's a new kind of things, the cloud is having still this kind of legacy sometimes, especially in the infrastructure as a service. Secondary, the second point that I want to stress out, you do have an agile delivery of new feature. That means that every time you have a different version of API, and each new version is potentially open and prone to new 0-day. If you add on top of this consideration the fact that anyway you do have management of the underneath infrastructure, you see the complexity of the cloud topic that is not by design easier. And it's actually based on a good design, but I argue shouldn't be only based on well-architected framework, because what I show you, for example, about the VPC pivoting, is not actually part of that. So what I challenge every security architect, CTO, whoever I'm discussing projects with, is revert the picture of what you are analyzing and think like an attacker, including the VPC pivoting, a malicious tapping at the VPC, and all kind of issue you can find. It's true, and one of the main arguments of the difference between on-prem and cloud, that on-prem is containing a lot of legacy. That legacy that can be old stack in terms of technology, can be also a plethora of unsupported solution. I'm not going into the vulnerability management conversation here because I want to stick on design, but think that also the enforcement of policy across on-prem and cloud is different. One of the main challenge that you find in cloud is the API, the big number of API connectivity sometimes can be under the radar of a SOC. That is something that is not a real big is a concern, because obviously you need to create API gateway also on-prem, nothing but is less common to exploit for the design. One of the main issue that you see with all this API traffic passing under the radar is actually based on the incident response visibility. An on-prem picture is a bit more static, and let actually the incident response sometimes to be more conscious of what is running. The dynamic structure of ephemeral assets that like in PaaS, it's actually a big problem. If we add on top the function as a service, as a runtime control, and the exploitation of that and visibility of that, cloud is offering some challenges that you don't have generally on-prem. You could have it, for example, in a private cloud, but for sure the threat model of that can be a bit more limited. We have new picture coming into play, like the MPLS, because we could forecast that soon MPLS at the time that is moving and migrating to the SD-WAN solution could one day reach also the cloud service provider and somehow and become application routing through the SD-WAN and become the bridge. The scenario there depends on how the market will go down that path. It's obviously a risk that was never taken before, because it may generally you're having an MPLS attached at the very bottom between trusted domain. Now you have to route it up to the one. My main concern is so far the link to the cloud, where having actually also cost implication. So the control of those links, even in not direct manner, was obviously based also on availability of that bandwidth. So in case of an attack, true, you can use throttling and everything. You could have monitor in place that at least give you an heads up if something happen. If everything, also this private link will go through an SD-WAN solution that is anyway detached, and if it's not properly part of incident response in terms of monitoring, you could find something passing under the radar. One key factor of the cloud is for sure the orchestration that is out of your domain. So the orchestration that is taking place in on-prem sometimes is limited in terms of the technology option, but is tend to be within your infrastructure most of the time. Cloud does have orchestration layer that can be, for example, from your on-prem Terraform calling the cloud, and can be actually part of an exploitation as well. You could have somebody creating resources because he made it to get access to your subscription. You could have orchestration layer that are external to your subscription. And you'll have a complexity also of SaaS application having access. And let's think how complicated is the picture in terms of data lake access. So what I'm trying to say is it's easier to make a one-to-one match between infrastructure as a service and on-prem. It will never be easy to make a compare strictly security architecture related, because some implementation, the lateral move and MPLS space in the infrastructure as a service is completely different. One of the way out is actually the VPC, VPN tunnels, and everything you do have in a gateway kind of style. Automation play a big role. As I told you, don't forget to not have bias. What I notice is an extremely bad attitude. Doesn't matter if you are a CTO, if you are a CISO, what is your role, is to push and think that something is better than something else. It doesn't actually exist something better or worse for an attacker. Because let's be honest, if you find a 0 day in a cloud, you reuse that 0 day on X accounts. So the scaling of that is absolutely massive. And so for the attacker, cloud is even better. The orchestration side as well is an attack vector that wasn't there so easily before. Another thing is the game of the vulnerability management, that on-prem is everything patched. It's not always patch even cloud, sometimes depends on how you manage your own shop. If you have an Amazon guard duty with tons of alarms and nobody look at that, is another problem. Even from an hardening perspective, your hygiene is the main differentiator in whatever you run. What I'm trying to stress is don't have bias. I saw analysis that tend to think on components in cloud without zooming out the big picture. You can have a nice threat model that check everything into your VPC, but it doesn't consider that your subscription get access. There is a session hijacking of somebody from outside. And this confidence into that is one of the main issues. Cloud will become multi-cloud. You'll find more than once that you have a shop running in multiple places. Each design could have historical reason, and unfortunately we are repeating the same things that happen in on-prem. Because people, as I told you before, that rushed in infrastructure and later focus on PaaS to cut the bill, but infrastructure as a service is not anymore a big deal. A lot of A/B testing done in cloud with a CDN that is built into the cloud service provider, and the policy are managed in a way more sloppy manner than a CDN that was protecting the on-prem. You do have most of the time completely different way of thinking. What I'm a bit worried is the fact that you have a CDN included in the product itself does have most of the time limitation. So everything is cloud, does have a CDN, but it doesn't always offer you a security stack on top of the CDN. Certain services are having limitation and are really specific. At the time that we go on multi-cloud and each is not even using a common CDN layer, will increase the complexity. So what I'm stressing and trying to highlight here is think, if you are the security architect, also which challenge you'll have on managing and centralizing the visibility and the management of that. Another problem is we are differentiating the reliability engineering of the application with actually security. A lot of marketing tools that monitor if the user move the mouse, obviously as a security professional I dislike some portion of these tools for how invasive they are, but obviously from a security incident response standing point can have a lot of value sometimes. So they are generally used for funnel, trying to understand the sales, but we are missing to integrate all these tools all together and trying to see the big picture. So I do see various challenges at the time that we integrate also hybrid deployment. If I take a vSphere implementing more and more the on-prem stack of the vSphere for PaaS deployment, I'm expecting that obviously that service get more and more exposed. So you'll find that the routing will be done to that, and you need to think how some of this design wasn't supposed to be done for something exposed. So what worries me is more the transformation, the massive transformation that on-prem will have with SD-WAN and MPLS moving up, hybrid, and where you are having a pipeline that include also deployment in-house. I know that hybrid deployment in private cloud sometimes was already there, but not everybody is measured at the same way. So this one is the portion of the on-prem worry. On the cloud, the multi-cloud picture, different functionality, different visibility, lateral move, east, west, is commonly seen within the same subscription. It's not actually that true, because you should include also all express route, you should include all VPN that you have on the VPC, you should include also migration path that you had when you were trying multi-cloud. CDN connectivity, tunnels there as well. And so keeping the big picture is the main complex problem. So with this lesson, I want you to focus on my voice and what I'm saying. I neglected to create slides to avoid to confuse you with a fancy diagram on everything. The concepts are simple because security architecture is simple. You need to know what you protect and how something is connected. East to west need to be enlarged to everything. east-west, become cloud to on-prem, cloud to cloud, CDN, different CDN, links, A/B testing, that if exploit the application routing of A/B testing, you are capable to actually reroute all traffic. So even without going in big conversation on BGP, DNS, problem that we have specific to cloud, for example, is subdomain takeover. You don't have that problem in on-prem at all. So that doesn't mean that DNS isn't the problem in on-prem. Don't take me wrong. But you don't have that kind of problem. So security of DNS in cloud is so specific and is problematic. We are going to enlarge the number of problems on cloud with a dynamic attitude of new API released. So work on the gateway, map the gateway, API gateway all around. Don't let an API to be run straight into a pod and have a problem where you can find the external API on same backend that is actually running internal API. So the good hygiene means also a good way of thinking. Keep it simple, keep it mapped in terms of understand your lateral move opportunities. The main issue that I notice doing an incident response is that a good incident responder, the first things that is trying to think is what they got access to. And the answer is generally a server. And they have to repeat, okay, which data? Don't repeat the same error that you could have done in on-prem. Know what is contained, what your application is getting access to. So the problem is we are moving, talking, everybody is cloud ready. But practically, we moved from an asset centric kind of security, live from a second, I'm talking about infrastructure in general, I'm not talking about design principle like perimeter security. I'm talking in terms, we focus a lot in security on defending the asset. We are moving to a data-centric security. That it means that we want to protect the data. DLP, think on how much, obviously, any data breach, the first question is what they got. And so, think into your design. Fancy threat model that don't consider the underneath access, the lateral channel, in terms of lateral move, as I explained, and don't know which data is passing. You need to know if a VPC, a malicious tap is enabled, a mirroring of your traffic is enabled on VPC, what actually the attacker can see. And there is a two-speed in security right now. There is the speed of a forward thinker that built in security into engineering, merged the reliability engineering, and is even capable to do chaos engineering for security. And there is the other one that kept separated and is having big conversation on how to merge it, on how it could be. And actually those conversations that he's doing are cost-based, not performance-driven. So I talk a lot, not just for the sake of you to hear my terrible accent. He was trying to express content, original content, because these conversations are not common in the industry. And if the takeaway of this lesson, difference between on-prem and cloud. In any case, even on-prem is not static. Think about the evolution that is taking and think how the piece of the puzzle are connecting. Consider if you have already legacy stuff that you don't actually focus anymore in cloud, like infrastructure as a service, because you are more focused on the PaaS and FaaS, and trying to understand your multi-cloud strategy and how all these pieces are together. Because you can't distinguish on-prem and cloud security at the time of it anyway. You risk even a lateral move between the two. You need to have one thinking, and one thinking that makes sense. I hope you found this video full of my passion for the topic of infrastructure. It is really important to give an help on making simple, complex conversation like this one. And I hope in somehow I made it. And if not, comment. I'm really keen to hear your opinion. Okay? Thanks a lot for your time. Have a good one. Cheers.